Happy Earth Day! My name is Jackie Takis, and I'm a faculty member with the University of Maryland Extension. I'd like to thank the Go Green team for the opportunity to talk to the Asbury Solomons community about some of the projects we have been partnering on that will help improve the water quality of the Patuxent River and Chesapeake Bay. For those of you that might be new to the area or the topic of water quality, I'll be starting this presentation off with some facts about the bay and river and some background on water quality issues, and then we'll finish by discussing some of our current and future projects. Asbury Solomons is located roughly midway up the Chesapeake Bay. Some fun facts about the bay. It was formed about 10,000 years ago when glaciers melted and flooded the Susquehanna River Valley. It is roughly 200 miles long, stretching from Havre de Grace, Maryland to Virginia Beach, Virginia. The bay's width ranges from 4 miles near Aberdeen, Maryland, to 30 miles near Cape Charles, Virginia. The bay and its tidal tributaries have 11,684 miles of shoreline, which is more than the entire shoreline of the west coast of the United States. The Chesapeake Bay is an estuary where more than 18 trillion gallons of fresh and salt water mix. Approximately 51 billion gallons of water flow into the bay each day from freshwater tributaries. The bay is home to more than 3,600 species of plants and animals, including 348 species of finfish and 173 species of shellfish. The bay receives about half its water volume from the Atlantic Ocean in the form of salt water. The other half, the freshwater half, drains into the bay from its watershed. A watershed is an area of land that drains into a particular river, lake, bay, or other body of water. The area of the Chesapeake's watershed is roughly 64,000 square miles, stretching some 524 miles from Cooperstown, New York, to Norfolk, Virginia. It includes parts of 6 states: Delaware, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and West Virginia, as well as the entire District of Columbia. It has the largest land-to-water ratio at 14:1, more than any coastal body of water in the world. This is why the actions on land of the more than 18 million people that call the bay's watershed home have such a big impact on the bay's health. Asbury Solomons sits on the banks of the Patuxent River in the Patuxent watershed, a sub-watershed of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And a river and watershed is located entirely within the state of Maryland. It is approximately 110 miles long and, at its deepest, 175 feet deep. Its 937 square mile watershed encompasses about 10% of Maryland's surface area and lies in portions of 7 counties: Anne Arundel, Calvert, Charles, Howard, Montgomery, Prince George's, and St. Mary's. Everyone in one way or another is concerned about clean water. At the most basic level, people want clean drinking water, but people also want clean water for activities that include tourism and commerce, recreation, or food harvest. In 2004, the Blue Ribbon Finance Panel report estimated that the Chesapeake Bay's value was more than $1 trillion related to fishing, tourism, property values, and shipping activities. If you were to adjust that figure for inflation, the number would have increased to roughly $1.3 trillion in 2019. The commercial seafood industry in Maryland and Virginia contribute $2 billion in sales, $1 billion in income, and more than 41,000 jobs to the local economy. The saltwater recreational fishery contributes $1.6 billion in sales, which then created more than $800 million of additional economic activity and roughly 13,000 jobs. So no matter why a person cares about water, for drinking or fun, they should all care about keeping it clean. Historical writings about the Chesapeake and the Patuxent River tell a tale of clean waters teeming with life. Today we read stories more about sediment plumes, algal blooms, trash in our waterways, and the ultimate loss of life, all results of pollutants entering our waterways. There are 5 major sectors within the watershed that contribute to pollution in the bay. Forests represent an ideal pollutant load. Agriculture, wastewater, and septic are highly regulated sectors that have shown significant reductions in pollution over the last 15 years. By contrast, urban stormwater pollution has been slowly increasing over the years with continued development of our landscape. Pollution can also be separated into 2 types. Point source types, where you can actually point to a specific source of a pollutant, like a pipe drain, or non-point sources, which are diffuse sources of pollution, typically in the form of runoff. This is the source type commonly associated with the urban stormwater sector. So let's talk about the issue with stormwater runoff. Stormwater is excess rain that does not soak into the ground nor absorbed by trees and plants. Instead, it runs off into storm drains, pipes, and flows untreated into streams. Most of the stormwater in urban areas is a result of impervious surfaces such as buildings, paved roads, and parking lots. Impervious surfaces can also be compacted soil, gravel, or other surfaces that prevent rainfall from penetrating the ground. When impervious surfaces prevent or inhibit the flow of water into the earth, more water is left on the surface, which results in more stormwater. Excess stormwater is one of the biggest threats to local watersheds. In unspoiled environments with no impervious surfaces, 90% of precipitation moves naturally through the water cycle, with 50% going into the ground and 40% being taken up by trees and being evapotranspirated back into the environment. Over time, as cities and suburbs grow and replace forest and agricultural land, impervious surfaces increase and consequently increases runoff. As you can see, by increasing the imperviousness by just 10% can double the amount of runoff. More development results in more runoff. When a watershed becomes over 75% covered in imperviousness, not only does the runoff magnify, but the recharge of the groundwater is cut off. As the water runs over land, it picks up pollutants like trash, nutrients, increased temperatures, toxins, sediment, and bacteria. As all of these pollutants are important to address and mitigate, recent emphasis has been focused on nutrients and sediments. Nutrients, also known as nitrogen and phosphorus, or commonly fertilizer, is necessary for life and growth. But too much of a good thing is not necessarily a good thing. Eutrophication is the state in which a body of water is over-enriched with nutrients. Eutrophication can lead to algal blooms, which can impact water quality. Those blooms can shade aquatic grasses, release toxins, and cause oxygen issues, just to name a few. Sediments carried by stormwater from construction sites, farmlands, turfed areas, and other erosive areas can bring bound pollutants like oils, heavy metals, and nutrients with them. Sediments can also choke out streams and smother vital habitat areas. In order to mitigate these issues, we must engage in practices that reduce stormwater runoff. The old way of treating stormwater was to direct all runoff to large retention ponds or directly to open waterways. Let's take a look at where you live. Asbury Solomons is a 42-acre tract of land that was built before Maryland updated their environmental site design standards for stormwater management. If you walk around the Asbury Solomons campus, you may recognize some of these older stormwater conveyance systems. Downspouts going directly into the ground to drainage pipes, and storm grates in low spots in the turf to move water off the grounds. Asbury Solomons is a network of storm drains and underground conveyance that direct untreated stormwater to the Patuxent River. Unless you're the engineering type, this graphic may look a little overwhelming, so let me simplify it. When it rains, the untreated stormwater runoff from the Asbury campus is collected and sent straight to the Patuxent River. So playing devil's advocate here for a minute, what this means is, if there were an oil leak left in a driveway or parking lot, or fertilizer was unintentionally spread into a roadway, these potential pollutants have a direct pathway to the river. With today's new environmental site design standards for stormwater management in Maryland, developers are required to treat as much of the stormwater on site as possible. So instead of seeing a large retention pond in the community or piping drainage directly to the waterway, new developments are required to implement stormwater practices like downspout disconnections, swales, and rain gardens or bioretentions, just to name a few. Here are a few examples of some of the new large stormwater management systems now being used in large developed areas. You may be familiar with the one in the lower right, which is a bioretention garden in a parking lot. There are also a number of smaller practices that can be implemented on smaller residential properties. Regardless of the size of the property, when it comes to managing the potential for stormwater to pick up and move pollutants into a waterway, we want to manage three aspects of that property: its impervious area, its landscape, and its waste. Some of the common ways to manage impervious areas include redirecting downspouts from impervious surfaces and stormwater conveyance systems to permeable areas with downspout disconnects, collecting or harvesting stormwater with rain barrels or cisterns for later uses, collecting stormwater in rain gardens or infiltration trenches to allow for gradual infiltration into the soil, or one can remove impervious surfaces and replace them with conservation landscapes or permeable pavement. When considering the landscape, property owners are encouraged to keep shorelines buffered, plant trees in open, unused areas, and to follow all university recommendations and state regulations when it comes to the application of fertilizers and herbicides. And lastly, it's important to manage the waste of our furry friends. The Chesapeake Bay watershed is home to over 7 million pets, and their waste is a significant contributor to bacterial issues within some of our waterways. The best place for their waste? The landfill. So remember, scoop the poop. It's not only a nice gesture for your neighbors, but it's important for healthy water quality. So now let's take a few final minutes here to look at what the Asbury Solomons community is doing to help water quality. In 2018, in an effort to assess how the untreated stormwater could be better managed, your Go Green team funded a campus-wide stormwater management plan. This plan helped identify areas where conservation landscapes, cisterns, rain gardens, and even some pervious pavement may be possible. If you are looking at this map and worried that something may or may not be happening where you live, rest assured this is just a working concept. Few actual sites have been ground-truthed for their ability to infiltrate or have garnered property owner approval. This is just a starting point, a conversation piece if you please. This past year, we were able to install the plan's kickoff project, a conservation and cistern project at the main entrance of the community. This some 400 plus square foot garden contains 85 native plants and two 265-gallon cisterns. Since this project was installed during COVID restrictions, many of you were unable to see the transformation of the site, so I created this 45-second time-lapse video for you. The two cisterns will collect water from the rooftop and slowly water the garden during dry times through the use of soaker hoses. Should there be a storm event that fills the cisterns, they are plumbed to return the overflow to the stormwater system. This is okay though, as it's the first flush of rain that is the dirtiest, and that water will have been collected within the cisterns. I also understand that Asbury Solomon residents have mixed feelings about the aesthetics of the cisterns. Rest assured, over time the plantings will cover or hide much, if not all, of the cisterns. In all honesty, though, Asbury Solomons is the first in the county, and possibly all of southern Maryland, to be utilizing these state-of-the-art cisterns, and should be proud to show them off. For those of you that are gardening buffs, here are the 5 plant types that are in the garden. They will provide different colors throughout the year. You may also be interested to know that along with this garden project, we will be putting in a nice, small sign in the garden that will describe the project. I hosted 2 virtual countywide workshops that highlighted the work at Asbury Solomons, and we are finalizing a website for residents to learn more about the stormwater plan and all the projects that come from it. In the last 2 months, we have been working on the development of 2 new projects on your campus. This first is a site that wasn't identified by the Stormwater Management Plan, but rather your grounds committee. I hope many of you recognize this area. It is the walking path along the river by Wesley Court. When it rains, water from the walking path and surrounding turf area is pooling on this part of the pathway, depositing dirt and potentially endangering path users. This past April, we came out and looked at the site and conducted a percolation test to see if we could easily fix the issue. We were delighted to find that the soils in this area infiltrated water very rapidly, and we hope by the end of the month to have approval to install a new garden in this area that will keep water off the pathway. The proposed garden is approximately 150 square feet and will consist of a slight berm on the back of the garden made using soil material excavated from the center. This is necessary to create a depression for water from the walking path to collect in the garden and infiltrate into the soil. A draft planting plan, including a mix of natives that can tolerate a variety of areas of moisture levels from wet to dry within the garden. Suggested species include ground cover, several herbaceous plants that bloom throughout the season, and low-growing shrubs. The installation of this project by our inaugural Calvert County Watershed Stewards Academy class provides participants with valuable hands-on experience and knowledge that they can then apply to other projects within their communities across the county. The second larger project is a project for which we are seeking external funds and is a combination conservation landscape and rain garden that utilizes a level spreader technology. This project will be located just outside the dining area of the community center. A level spreader is a device that takes a flow of stormwater and spreads it across an area, thus reducing the erosive nature of the water. There will be over 400 native plants planted in this area. As with our first project, we plan to conduct 2 public workshops that address stormwater issues and best management practices and how to implement these types of practices at small-scale residential properties. Our hope is that Asbury Solomons will be a model for other communities and become a shining example for Calvert County residents for how stormwater can and should be managed. Again, I'm Jackie Takis. It's been a pleasure working with the Asbury Solomons community, its Go Green and Grounds committees, and I look forward to future discussions and projects. If you have any questions about this presentation or any of the projects mentioned, you can reach me by email at jtakis@umd.edu or by phone at 240-393-6508. Thank you, and have a great Earth Day.